She flew to Mexico for a birthday trip with 6 acquaintances. On the morning of October 29th, 2022, she was found at a villa in Cabo San Lucas. The group told the doctor a single word: alcohol. 2 weeks later, the world saw a video in which she is being treated violently inside that same villa. Mexico classified the death as femicidio and issued an arrest warrant. The United States declined to press charges. 3.5 years on, no one has been held criminally accountable. Her name is Shanquella Robinson, and this is the story of how 2 countries looked at the same death and saw something completely different in it. Shanquella Robinson comes into the world on January 9th, 1997, in Charlotte, North Carolina. She grows up in this city, finishes school, and takes her first steps in her own business. By the age of 25, the outline of an independent life is taking shape. A steady clientele as a hairstylist, her own hands, her own signature style, her own audience. Alongside this, she launches a women's clothing line. A small one, without flashy investments, built step by step, order after order. Her social media pages are the shop front of that work. New designs, fittings, short videos with clients. People who knew her later described the same traits: energetic, caring, deeply attached to her mother. Salamandra Robinson raised her alone, and her daughter remains her main anchor. They call each other every day. Shanquella shares her plans, shows new sketches, consults on bigger purchases. Her business is just picking up momentum, and she openly talks about where to head next. In the fall of 2022, an invitation reaches her, a short trip to Mexico for a birthday, in the company of acquaintances. The place is Cabo San Lucas, a resort town on the southern tip of the Baja California Peninsula, popular with Americans. Her companions number 6, all roughly the same age, all from the same social circle. According to her family, Shanquella knows some of them only superficially, more like acquaintances of acquaintances than close friends. The trip is planned for a few days, with a departure at the end of October. She packs quickly, without fuss. A short vacation, warm sea, photos for her feed, a return home to a new batch of orders. Her mother sees her off. They hug in the usual rhythm of an ordinary goodbye. Neither of them, in that moment, imagines that this conversation will be their last. On October 28, 2022, the group lands in Cabo San Lucas. The city greets them with the usual resort set: white buildings, cacti, ocean, a soft breeze off the Pacific. The group heads to the gated Fundadores complex, private villas within the Pedregal area, a district known for its quiet streets and a high level of privacy. The villa the group rents sits on a slope, with a pool, a terrace, and an ocean view. Those who arrive are a compact crew from a single social circle in Charlotte. Among them are Dejane Jackson and Daisy Creed. Judging by the footage that will later appear on Instagram and TikTok, the first evening is loud: a laid table, cocktails, music, filming by the pool. Short clips go out to their feeds, everyone smiling, posing, hugging. Nothing in them hints at what is coming. The night of October 29th becomes the stretch of time that the group will later describe in different ways. Some speak of a party that kept going, others of sleeping in separate rooms. There is no set of statements collected into a single solid timeline. There are no outside witnesses. The villa is isolated, neighboring buildings are scattered along the slope, and the nearest resort staff is far from the living quarters. The property cameras, which will later become the subject of FBI requests, mostly cover common areas, not the interior of the house. The morning of October 29th arrives quietly. On the group's social media, a pause. No stories, no posts, no updates. It is precisely this silence that investigators will later zero in on. Not a single post, not a single signal that something is going wrong comes out of the villa in those first hours after waking, but something is already going wrong. At exactly 2 in the afternoon, local time on October 29th, 2022, a doctor is called to the villa. This is not an ambulance and not a medical crew. This is a doctor provided by the Fundadores complex's concierge service. He works within the resort area and usually comes out to guests with minor complaints: dehydration, food poisoning, aftermath of a hot day. This time, he is met with a unified version. The group says the same thing. Shanquella drank too much the night before. Her poor condition is alcohol poisoning. The doctor is led into the room where the young woman lies. The examination takes place right at the villa. The hospital is not considered. Later, the doctor will give testimony that becomes the foundation of the Mexican investigation. He was allowed to examine her only after a noticeable delay following the first signs of deterioration. In his words, the group was in no rush to call an ambulance, preferring to wait for his arrival. Closer to 6 in the evening on the same day, he records the death. In the box, for cause of death, he enters what he heard from those gathered in the house: alcohol poisoning. This record becomes the first official document concerning the death of Shanquella Robinson, and in the coming days it will serve as the anchor for every explanation the group gives to relatives back home and to the Mexican police. The single version, spoken out of several mouths at once, will later draw the attention of the investigators. In criminology, this is called a coordinated statement, when a group of people frames the circumstances identically, word for word. On the scene, in those first hours, no one questions it. The doctor leaves, the body stays, the paperwork is filed. Mexican services receive a case that, on paper, looks like a tragedy but not a crime. On the same day, October 29th, a phone rings in Charlotte. Salamandra Robinson, Shanquella's mother, picks up and hears news she refuses to accept right away. She is told her daughter has alcohol poisoning. The doctor could not save her. The body is in Mexico. Salamandra does not believe it from the very first minutes. She knows her daughter better than anyone. Yes, Shanquella drinks in company, like many of her peers, but not to the point of losing consciousness, not to dangerous doses. Her daughter always called in the evening, even from parties, even from other people's homes. The math of this tragedy simply does not add up. Salamandra starts asking questions of those who were at the villa. The answers come back vague. She drank too much. We didn't realize how bad it was. The doctor got there too late. Every next conversation adds not clarity, but anxiety. The group quickly returns to the United States. Not one of the 6 stays in Mexico to accompany the body, handle the paperwork, stay by her side. Shanquella is left alone, in a foreign country, inside an official procedure that her mother has to drag forward from thousands of miles away. The repatriation drags on. The Mexican side embalms the body according to local procedure. This is a standard step for cross-border transport. The cost of transportation falls on the family. Several days pass before Shanquella is brought back to Charlotte. Salamandra insists on a second autopsy. She needs an independent report from American pathologists because she does not trust the Mexican one, and she trusts the group's version even less. In a brief interview with a local TV station, she says a phrase that will spread across the country. Something in this story does not add up. From that moment on, the lone voice of a mother begins, slowly but irreversibly, to unfold a very large case. The first link in that unfolding is the medical examination. The Mexican side conducts the autopsy quickly. The final report contains language that has nothing to do with alcohol: severe spinal cord trauma. It additionally records the displacement of the uppermost cervical vertebra, the one that holds up the base of the skull. In non-medical terms, this is a serious injury to the cervical spine, unrelated to alcohol poisoning. According to Mexican pathologists, such an injury does not appear on its own. It is tied to external physical impact and is incompatible with the version the entire group had been repeating to the doctor just hours earlier. Alcohol poisoning does not cause injuries of this kind. The second autopsy takes place already in the United States, after repatriation. By that point, the body has been embalmed. The Mexican procedure preserves the tissues but simultaneously complicates the examination of soft structures, including the ligaments and the membranes of the spinal cord. The American pathologists do not confirm the neck injury in the same terms. Their report introduces another detail: cerebral edema. They leave the cause of death box empty, undetermined. The two reports diverge on the key point. Mexico speaks of a fracture in the spinal column, the United States of an undetermined cause. For the Mexican prosecutor's office, the decisive document remains the initial report, completed before embalming, when the tissues still allowed the injury to be fixed unambiguously. For the American federal prosecutor, the decisive document will turn out to be the second one, the one with no precise cause. This divergence is not a bureaucratic detail. It is the crack through which, later on, the criminal case's trajectory will leak out. But for now, no one knows this. For now, the family is simply holding two documents about their daughter, and these documents are saying different things. In November 2022, material appears on social media that instantly moves the story out of the corridors of the investigation and onto millions of screens. A short clip surfaces on TikTok and almost simultaneously on Instagram. The quality is amateur, but the scene is recognizable. It is the interior of that same villa in Cabo San Lucas. Viewers recognize Shanquella in the frame. Next to her is a person whom, according to the Mexican side, the case will later single out as a suspected participant in the conflict. The recording shows physical violence being directed at Shanquella. Off camera are other members of the trip. Nobody tries to intervene. Someone is filming. The voices in the frame do not sound alarmed, more like a conversation in the background of what is happening, without any attempt to stop it. On camera, Shanquella looks disoriented and does not react the way a person fully conscious would react. The clip runs for less than a minute. In 24 hours, the video racks up millions of views. TikTok's algorithms push it into trending. It gets shared in chats, reposted to YouTube and Twitter. A hashtag rises up around it, Justice for Shanquella, and it quickly gains momentum and becomes a sustained campaign. The footage is rewatched not only by viewers, but by journalists, lawyers, ordinary users who compare what is on screen with the official version about alcohol poisoning. The family does not learn about this footage from investigators. Salamandra sees the clip on social media, like the rest of the world. That moment she will later call the second blow, after the news of the death itself. The circumstances of her daughter's last hours become a public video, before they become a line in a case file. The alcohol version falls apart in front of millions. The clip does not match what the group told the doctor. It does not match what they told the mother. It matches only one thing: the Mexican conclusion about physical violence suffered by the victim. From this point on, Shanquella Robinson's story stops being a private matter and turns into a public case. And it is exactly this public pressure that speeds up the Mexican side. On November 16, 2022, shortly after the video spread around the world, the prosecutor's office of the state of Baja California Sur classifies the death of Shanquella Robinson as femicidio. In Mexican law, this term is not a synonym for murder. Femicidio is a separate serious article, applied in cases where the death of a woman is tied to gender-based motives, humiliation, a systemic pattern of violence, signs of prior beating, or captivity. Mexico has been consistently developing this statute since 2012 in response to its own grim statistics. On November 23, 2022, the state's Attorney General, Daniel de la Rosa Anaya, signs an arrest warrant. In the Mexican side's wording, this concerns an acquaintance of the deceased who was present on the trip. The suspect's name is not publicly disclosed in Mexican official documents. This is in line with local pre-trial rules. De la Rosa Anaya gives a video interview to the local outlet BCS Noticias. In it, he says the phrase that will close the alcohol version for good. According to him, the cause of Shanquella's death is not linked to alcohol and cannot be written off as a domestic incident, and the established injuries are consistent with the findings of the autopsy recorded by the Mexican side. The name of the suspected figure becomes public a few months later. In March 2023, the family's attorneys, Ben Crump and Sue Ann Robinson, publish an open letter to President Biden and Secretary of State Blinken. In the letter, they name Dejane Jackson as the person who, according to their information, is being sought by the Mexican side in connection with the case. At this point, the Mexican legal side of the case looks almost fully built out. A qualification, a warrant, a named suspect. Only one step remains: the physical detention of the suspect. And it is precisely here that the story will stall for a long time. One of the reasons for that pause is the parallel investigation conducted by the Federal Bureau of Investigation of the United States. On November 18, 2022, 2 days after the Mexican femicidio classification, the FBI officially announces that it has opened its own case. The situation falls under its jurisdiction by a simple rule: the death of a United States citizen abroad under circumstances of possible violent nature is a federal basis for intervention. In January 2023, the FBI sends its Mexican counterparts 11 written requests. The list is notable. It includes data on the owner of the Fundadores villa, recordings from the property's cameras, audio of calls to local emergency services, the full medical materials from the first autopsy, the body examination protocol, and a list of everyone present in the house at the time of the death. These requests will later surface in court filings and reveal how deeply the federal agent studied the circumstances of the trip. In parallel, the Bureau interviews members of the group who returned to Charlotte. The conversations are held behind closed doors. The content of the protocols is not made public, but details gradually leak into the media. Some participants of the trip give contradictory statements. Their versions diverge at key points in time. Someone says they saw the party continuing until morning. Someone says they went to bed long before the incident. Not one of the suspects is detained. All of them remain free, continue living in North Carolina, appear on public social media, even under the spotlight of public attention. For the family, this freedom of the suspects becomes one of the main sources of pain. The mother tells reporters, the Mexican side reached a decision within a few weeks, while the American side looks at the same case and moves in an entirely different way. The sense that two jurisdictions see the same case in fundamentally different ways keeps growing, and a few months later, it receives direct confirmation in the form of an official FBI response. On April 12, 2023, the FBI informs the Robinson family of the federal prosecutor's decision. The wording is short: there will be no charges. According to the Bureau, the evidence gathered is insufficient for federal criminal prosecution. In addition, the federals note that they consider the cause of death to be undetermined. This is a direct reliance on the American autopsy report, the very one where, after embalming, the neck injury was not confirmed in unambiguous terms. For Salamandra Robinson, this is the second blow. The first was the call from Mexico in October. The second is the answer from her own country. After the video surfaced, after the Mexican warrant, after the named suspect, she had been expecting the opposite outcome. The family receives the decision in writing. The attorneys Ben Crump and Sue Ann Robinson publish its key fragments and comment sharply. Crump, one of the most well-known civil rights attorneys in the United States, calls this decision deeply unjust toward the African American community. His statement sets out the question clearly. How did an agency that had in hand a viral video, a Mexican finding, and a parallel investigation arrive at a conclusion of insufficient evidence? Formally, the federal answer rests on the American procedural standard. A charge requires evidence that will withstand scrutiny in federal court. In the prosecutor's opinion, a video without a confirmed causal link to a specific injury will not pass that test. Publications in major outlets, CNN, Time, ABC News, record the bewilderment of lawyers. Many of them note that, with this kind of material, in an ordinary domestic case, the case is at minimum handed to a grand jury. Here, it doesn't even reach a preliminary hearing. The criminal case in the United States effectively closes. The Mexican warrant remains unfulfilled. Two documents concerning Shanquella Robinson exist simultaneously in two countries. One calls her death femicidio, the other calls it nothing at all. Two documents in two countries give birth to one legal deadlock. Mexico formally demands the suspect through an international warrant. The United States does not hand her over through extradition channels. The reasons on paper sound technically neutral. Insufficient evidentiary base under American standards, differences in the qualification of the act, the absence of a matching federal charge. But in practice, it creates a closed loop. A United States citizen cannot be handed over to Mexico without a comparable federal basis at home. There is no basis at home, because the prosecutor's office deemed the evidence insufficient. The Mexican warrant hangs in the air. The family tries to apply pressure through political channels. The attorneys write letters to the White House, the State Department, members of Congress. Individual congressmen from North Carolina raise the issue in their own appeals. But no political movement happens. The decision on extradition remains within the prerogative of federal agencies, and those agencies do not change their decision. None of the participants of that trip has been publicly detained. According to open sources, they continue to live in North Carolina and neighboring states. Their social media surfaces from time to time in the feeds of civic activists. A parallel process develops online. Users spread publicly available information about them under the hashtag Justice for Shanquella. This process becomes a storyline in itself, digital publicity against legal standstill. In an interview, the mother says a phrase that captures the state of the family more precisely than any legal formulation. She says her daughter has disappeared from the system, not from the news about her goes on, but precisely from the system that was supposed to protect her and, failing that, was supposed to provide justice through the established channels. At the same time, there are petitions and public rallies in Charlotte and other cities. The Justice for Shanquella movement does not fade, even though the criminal side of the case has hit a full dead end. From here, the family and their attorneys look for a legal detour, and they find it not in the criminal, but in the civil lane. In October 2024, exactly on the second anniversary of Shanquella's death, the attorneys file a civil lawsuit in a North Carolina court. The defendants are the group the press has long since dubbed the Cabo Six, the six companions of that October trip. The basis is a wrongful death claim, a legal formula that allows liability for a death caused by action or inaction. A civil suit does not send anyone to prison, but it forces the defendants to testify under oath, to reveal details of that night, to produce messages, to confirm or refute versions. That is exactly what the family had been waiting for from the criminal process, and it is exactly what becomes available through the civil court. The suit seeks financial compensation and, more importantly, public disclosure of the circumstances of the evening of October 28th and the morning of October 29th. For Shanquella Robinson, the second item matters more than the first. In response, one of the defendants takes a step that no one had taken on the criminal side. His defense declares that his actions that night fall under self-defense. This line is the first public admission of physical contact with Shanquella by anyone in the group. Up until now, all six had either stayed silent or repeated the alcohol version. A claim of self-defense effectively admits, between Shanquella and at least one of those present, there was a physical confrontation. Other defendants file their own objections. Some try to challenge jurisdiction, insisting that the events took place outside North Carolina's reach. Some demand dismissal on formal grounds. The process slides into a long phase of motion exchanges, typical of civil cases of this scale. But the main thing has already happened. The public space has received the first acknowledgement of physical contact, and that acknowledgement can no longer be erased. The acknowledgement cannot be erased, but it is not enough to change the final picture. As of the spring of 2026, no one has faced criminal liability for the death of Shanquella Robinson. 3.5 years have passed. The Mexican arrest warrant is still formally in force. The participants of the trip have not traveled to Mexico and have no intention of doing so, and without the physical appearance of the suspect on Mexican territory, the warrant remains nothing but paper. The federal case in the United States is closed. The prosecutor's office has confirmed that reopening is possible only with the emergence of new evidence, of a kind that was not in the original sample. In theory, new material may come out of the civil process, once the defendants, under oath, begin answering the family attorney's questions. In practice, this is a long road with an uncertain outcome. The civil process goes on, hearings get postponed, the parties exchange filings, attorneys demand document disclosure. The case is led by the same team that walked the family through the previous stage: Ben Crump, Sue Ann Robinson, and their partners. They name no dates for a possible decision on the merits. The video from the villa is still openly available. People re-watch it, quote it, debate it. For some, it is a model of how social media has replaced law enforcement in the role of first witness. For others, it is a symbol of how a video recording, without the backing of the system, leads nowhere. The Justice for Shanquella hashtag has grown into a sustained movement. Under it, cases come together in which cross-border justice stalls. For the mother, Shanquella Robinson, this hashtag is at once a comfort and a rebuke. The question it all began with still has no answer. What exactly happened to her daughter during those October hours, and who will answer for it? The story of Shanquella Robinson has remained open. It is in that openness that it has lodged itself in the American consciousness as one of the defining cases of the decade, a case about where the line runs between the silence of the system and its willingness to act. 41 years old, a dream of a life by a warm sea that had finally come true. and a quiet bay off the island of St. John, where on the night of March 8, 2021, Sarm Heslop vanishes without a trace from a 47-foot catamaran. Her phone stays on board, her passport, her wallet, her clothes, all still there. Her boyfriend Ryan Bain waits 9 hours before making a proper call to the rescue services. And when the police come up to the yacht, he stands in the doorway and refuses to let them in. Almost 4 years later, his only public word is a complaint about the journalists. This is a story in which the absence of a body, the absence of evidence, and a locked cabin door became the main answer. There are dreams people carry inside for years and almost never dare to follow. Sarm Heslop dared. She was born on December 19th, 1979, in the English city of Southampton. An ordinary family, an ordinary path through life. School, friends, small plans. Then work as a flight attendant. The sky, passengers, loud airports, short stops in unfamiliar cities. She flew for many years and gradually grew tired of a schedule that left no room for her own self. By the age of 40, Sarm was looking more and more at the world map, seeing not a flight route but a place where she wanted to live. The Caribbean. Sunshine almost all year round, a warm sea, boats, silence between the islands. She told those close to her that she was tired of spinning endlessly in circles. She wanted to stop somewhere where time moved more slowly. In 2020, at the height of the pandemic, she was using a dating app, and there she met Ryan Bain. He was in his 40s, an American from the small town of Lake Orion in the state of Michigan. He had a yacht, not just a boat, a 47-foot catamaran called Siren Song. On that yacht, he worked, lived, and traveled around the Caribbean. Their messages turned into calls, and the calls turned into trips. Sarm decided her dream had finally taken shape. She quit her job in aviation, packed up her things, flew across the ocean, and moved in with Ryan on board. She worked as a chef on the charters they ran for tourists, cooked, served, smiled at the guests, and in the evenings watched the sun sink into the water. To her friends, she sent a short message. This was the best chapter of her life. The United States Virgin Islands became her home, a turquoise bay, white sand, freedom. From the shore, it all looked like a postcard, but it was from that very postcard that she herself would soon disappear. The postcard picture had precise coordinates. It was the catamaran Siren Song, 47 feet long, 2 hulls, white sides, sails that caught the trade wind. The vessel belonged to Ryan Bain and served as both a floating home and a business. By day, charter trips with tourists. In the evening, a quiet anchorage in some sheltered bay. Ryan was the captain and owner, Sarm ran the kitchen and was the face of the guest area. Together they cruised the Virgin Islands, St. Thomas, St. John, sometimes British Tortola. Guests paid for week-long tours, for dinners on deck, for the chance to head out into the open sea. Sarm was in charge of the menu. She cooked fish, salads, simple Caribbean dishes, and she knew how to keep up a conversation with strangers, a habit left over from her years in the sky. Ryan held the wheel. From the outside, they looked like a well-matched couple. In the spring of 2021, the catamaran was anchored off the island of St. John. It is one of the quietest islands in the archipelago, a national park, almost no cars, fewer than 1,000 residents in the main town of Cruz Bay. The bay is sheltered from the wind, the water is clear, and at night all you can hear is the creak of rigging and the occasional voice from a neighboring boat. For Sarm, this was just another season in her new life. For her loved ones back in England, things were more complicated. Because of the pandemic, travel was restricted, and Sarm's mother, Brenda Street, had not seen her daughter in person for a very long time. They spoke on video calls. Sarm would show her mother the bay, laugh, turn the camera to the water. Brenda would later say that her daughter sounded happy in those conversations, but sometimes tired, from the isolation, from the long days on board, from the fact that it was always the same one person around her. Not a single direct complaint can be heard in those recordings, only faint tones of voice a mother would remember forever, and the postcard still held for now. Meanwhile, the postcard was getting ready for its last frame. The evening of March 7th, 2021, Ryan and Sarm decided to leave the yacht and go ashore. They climbed into a small inflatable dinghy, started the motor, and headed for the pier at Cruz Bay. The main town of St. John is just a handful of streets along the water, about a dozen restaurants, a ferry dock. In March, there were few tourists, the pandemic still keeping the islands in a half-closed regime. The couple went into a restaurant near the bay. It was an ordinary dinner, a glass of wine, food, a conversation at the table. Outside it was dark, and over the bay, only scattered lights of yachts. A curfew was in force on the islands because of the pandemic. Guests had to leave venues by 10 at night. By that hour, the streets of Cruz Bay were almost completely empty. Sarm and Ryan left the restaurant. A security camera outside a bar and restaurant complex caught them, on the footage. An ordinary couple after dinner. They walked toward a small wooden pier where their boat was tied up. They were in summer clothes, not hurrying. A camera at the pier recorded the next moments. The couple went down to the water. Ryan helped Sarm into the dinghy. He started the motor. The boat pulled away from the dock and dissolved into the darkness of the bay. Somewhere out there, at anchor, sat Siren Song. These are the last frames in which Sarm is seen alive. The video preserves the exact time. Everything fits within curfew hours, nothing suspicious at first glance. The cameras show two people getting into a single boat and motoring off into the night. What happens on the deck of the catamaran, half an hour later, an hour later, 2 hours later, no one sees. There are no cameras out there. There will be no witnesses on neighboring yachts that night. Between the wooden pier and the hull of Siren Song, about 800 meters of quiet water and total silence. Silence on the water is not always peace. Sometimes it is simply the absence of witnesses. Ryan Bain's version of that night is short and carefully worded. They return to Siren Song after dinner. Sarm goes to the cabin and lies down to sleep. He stays on deck or in the salon. The details drift a little between different sources. At some point, he falls asleep too. Around 2:30 in the morning, he is woken by the anchor alarm. This is a special device that goes off if the yacht drifts too far from its mooring. He calls for Sarm. No answer. She is not in the cabin, not on deck, not in the salon, not in the dinghy they had tied to the catamaran for the night. He goes through Siren Song. He checks every place a person could be in the cramped space of a small vessel. And then comes one of the strangest moments in this whole story. All of Sarm's personal belongings remain on the yacht. Her phone lies in its usual spot. Her wallet is where she left it. Her passport too. Clothes, bag, cosmetics. Everything a woman would take if she were heading somewhere. Untouched. No sign of anyone preparing to leave. No note. No message on the phone. No signs of a struggle. No hatch thrown wide open. No broken dishes. And most importantly, nothing is heard on the water. No splash, no cry, no thud against the hull. On nearby boats, people are asleep, and none of them will later recall any noise that night. Common sense says one thing: a living person cannot vanish from a small catamaran anchored in a quiet bay, leaving behind all her belongings without making a single sound. But that is exactly how it looks by 2:30 on the morning of March 8th, 2021. Something has happened. And the only person who could possibly answer is Ryan Bain. The only person who could possibly answer does something very strange. Instead of dialing an emergency number and mobilizing the entire Coast Guard, Bain waits. According to the official record, after the alarm at 2:30, he only calls the local dispatch, and a full Coast Guard call does not go out for many more hours. His first call goes to the police dispatch of the Virgin Islands. And this is where one of the worst breakdowns in the case begins. By the official admission of the police themselves, that first call from Bain was not recorded. There is no audio file. All that remains is the operator's word and Bain's word about what was actually said. The official documented call to the United States Coast Guard comes in only at 11:45 in the morning, between the moment Bain supposedly discovers his partner is missing and the moment the rescue services receive a proper, logged signal. About 9 hours pass. 9 hours is not 5 minutes of shock. It is an entire night and half a morning. In that time, one could swim and search the whole bay. One could wake the nearby yachts. One could blow a horn, sweep a flashlight in every direction, shout, call for help every 15 minutes. If a person is drowning nearby, every minute matters. Bain does almost none of this. His explanations later come down to saying he was in shock, did not know what to do, tried to search for Sarm himself. But the details of those hours remain blurred. Sarm's family will spend years asking the same question, for which there is still no answer. What was he doing all that time? He did not shout. He did not wake anyone on the nearby yachts. He simply stayed silent. That question becomes the first real crack in the official version of an accident. The first real crack turns into a chasm within just a few hours. On the morning of March 8, 2021, after the official call, the Virgin Islands police approach Siren Song. On board, Ryan Bain meets them. They explain why they have come. They need to inspect the yacht. They need to understand where Sarm might have been, where she could have gone, whether there are any signs of a struggle or an emergency. These are standard actions in any disappearance. By the first logic, the partner of a missing woman should open the door himself and invite the officers to look everywhere. Bain does the opposite. He refuses to let the police on board. According to the officer's statements, he stands in the cabin doorway and physically blocks the entrance. He does not let them in. In response to questions, he cites his rights as guaranteed by the United States Constitution. Without a court warrant, the officers cannot force their way onto a private vessel. This is the foundation of American law, protection against arbitrary search. Formally, Bain is entirely within his rights. Legally, his behavior is simply using a normal procedure. But the situation looks strange to any outsider. The woman he lives with has vanished in the middle of the night. She has left all her belongings behind. And in the first hours after her disappearance, he chooses to shut the door in the face of the police who have come to help find her. The police retreat. They cannot escalate without a document. Coast Guard patrol boats begin combing the coastline. Drones rise into the air above the bay. Divers enter the water near the anchorage. Tracker dogs are brought to the pier where the couple got into the dinghy, and Siren Song remains at anchor. Her heavy white shadow reflects in the water. Inside, just one person. And that cabin where, by his account, Sarm spent her last night. For now, no one but him can go into that cabin. No one but him. And that is the most painful point in the whole story. To get onto Siren Song legally, the police need a warrant signed by a judge. That means collecting the initial materials, filing the request, and waiting for the document to work its way through the channels. On the small territory of the Virgin Islands, this procedure does not take minutes. According to the investigation records, the warrant for searching the catamaran takes about 11 hours to prepare. 11 hours is almost half a day. It stretches from lunchtime to deep into the night. It is a huge window of opportunity in which Siren Song effectively remains the private territory of one man. During those 11 hours, technically anything could happen on board. In forensic practice, such a time window is critically important. The situation on the vessel can change in any number of ways during that span, from ordinary cleaning to the natural loss of initial traces. No outside eye watches the yacht during those hours. When the police finally come back with a warrant, they step aboard a vessel that has already been cleaned. Any forensic expert will tell you, in cases like this, the first hours decide everything. Traces are fresh, microparticles are still in place, digital data has not yet been overwritten. After 11 hours, the picture can be completely rearranged. Bain himself uses that time in his own way. By the time the officers return with the document, he has already hired a lawyer. From that day on, he officially refuses to answer any questions from the investigators. All contact goes only through his attorney. He does not say another substantive word to the police. Not in March, not in April, not the following year, not many years later. For an ordinary disappearance, such a reaction is unusual. In most cases, the loved ones of the missing are eager to help the investigation themselves. Here, it is the opposite. And it is precisely this silence, multiplied by those 11 hours of uncontrolled time, that will forever mark Siren Song as the place where the real mystery begins. The place where the real mystery begins requires the investigation to come up with some working theory. The first official one sounds simple and humanly understandable. At night, Sarm woke up, went out on deck, possibly slipped or decided to take a swim, and fell into the water. A warm Caribbean bay, a dark night, an anchorage far from shore, an accident on the water. A huge search operation unfolds around this version. The United States Coast Guard sends boats into the bay. Helicopters fly over the water. Drones film the coastline from above. Divers descend to the seabed within a radius of the Siren Song mooring. On shore, rescuers work with dogs. Local yachting volunteers join the search and sweep through the neighboring coves. Days pass, no result. no body, no clothing. Not a single item belonging to Sarm in the water or on the shore. In warm tropical waters, traces of the missing are usually found within a day or two. The sea gives much back. Here, the sea gives back nothing. On the 9th day after the disappearance, a local resident is walking on a coastal trail. According to him, from the direction of the sea, he hears a human cry. This episode makes it into the case file but does not turn into evidence. No one can be sure if the sound is connected to Sarm's case. No more testimony like this will come forward. Sarm's friends and acquaintances give their statements. With one voice, they say, "She was a confident, strong swimmer. She knew the water well. She was not the kind of person who would jump into the sea for no reason at night from an anchored yacht. She did not use anything that would dull her reflexes. She had no reason to be in despair." Several supports under the accident theory start to crack. A strong swimmer, warm water, a quiet night. Everything left on board, nothing surfaces. For the family, and for part of the public, the picture fits together too neatly to accept as chance. At this very moment, a name surfaces in the case that no one had spoken about before. Corey Stevenson. She is Ryan Bain's ex-wife, with whom he was married from 2008 to 2014. Journalists dig up old documents from the state of Michigan. There is a police report dated November 27, 2011. According to the case materials, Ryan and Corey were returning home from a friend's wedding. On the way back, a conflict erupted between them. According to Corey, he was aggressive as early as in the car, kicking the dashboard and the stereo. When they got home, the situation escalated. The police report describes an episode of physical conflict between the spouses in the dining room. According to the case materials, Corey was left with bodily injuries and had her clothing torn. She locked herself in the laundry room and called the police. Bain was arrested. As a result of the proceedings, he was found guilty of domestic assault. In 2014, the couple was finally divorced. Corey herself would later say that her relationship with Bain changed right after the wedding. She even cut short the honeymoon. According to her, she was afraid for herself. When, in 2021, the story of a missing British woman from the Caribbean spread in the news, Corey recognized a familiar name. She herself contacted the Virgin Islands police. She passed on to them her materials about her ex-husband's character and her own concerns. Formally, none of this proves anything in Sarm's case. A person's past actions do not override the presumption of innocence. But for the investigators and for Sarm's family, it becomes another large shadow. Ryan Bain is not officially declared a suspect. The island's police commissioner calls him a person of interest. From that moment on, everyone following the case looks at Bain with different eyes. Everyone following the case looks at Bain with different eyes. And the first among them is the American Federal Authority. About 2 weeks after Sarm's disappearance, the FBI joins the investigation. The case goes from a local incident on a small island to a federal matter. This is logical. A citizen of another country has vanished, an American vessel and an American citizen are involved, and media attention grows every day. In Britain, the story hits the front pages. Every new interview with the mother, every new detail about Bain's past becomes a headline. Sarm's name is on the morning news and the evening talk shows. Her mother, Brenda Street, becomes the main voice of the family. She launches a campaign under the hashtag #FindSarm and an official memorial website for her daughter. She gives dozens of interviews. In one of them, she says words that, in a decent retelling, can only be conveyed in her own phrasing. She says she does not believe the accident theory and does not consider her daughter's disappearance a matter of chance. She demands a full search of the catamaran, the release of all recordings, and public transparency of the investigation. The Virgin Islands police respond cautiously. Representatives of the department cite the secrecy of the investigation. Many documents remain closed. For years, the family cannot get full footage from the cameras of that evening. They are shown fragments, and then the viewing is suddenly cut off. There are virtually no new official pieces of evidence that reach the public. Not a single breakthrough. Not a single new witness. No confirmed finds on the bottom of the bay or on the shore. Ryan Bain during this time says almost nothing in public. He lives his ordinary life, spends time on the catamaran, meets with his lawyer. He has not been charged with anything in connection with Sarm's disappearance. The case stalls. The enormous attention of the press, the enormous pressure from the family, the work of federal agents, and all of it runs up against one locked cabin door. Enormous pressure runs up against one locked cabin door, and then even that door will be gone. In November of 2021, only 8 months after Sarm's disappearance, Ryan Bain takes a step that will change the case forever. He sells Siren Song. According to the paperwork, the buyer pays about $229,000 for the catamaran. The vessel passes into other hands. For the lawyers of Sarm's family, this news lands like a blow. At that moment, a full forensic examination of the yacht had still never been carried out. The catamaran is the only known place where Sarm was last seen alive. In the view of the family's attorneys, it was the key location for any possible forensic work, and it is precisely this point that the investigation loses. The new owner does what any new owner does. He washes the vessel, he paints and sands the deck, he rebuilds the cabin interior to suit his own needs, he changes the upholstery, possibly removes and throws out the old material. He makes himself at home in what was once someone else's dwelling. Everything that could have remained on board from March 7, 2021, fibers, microparticles, fingerprints, possible digital traces on the instruments, gradually disappears. The family's lawyers call the sale a disaster. They write appeals, demanding at least a partial examination before the vessel is handed over to the new owner. But legally, Bain does not break any rules. Siren Song is his property. There is no court order forbidding its sale. The catamaran goes to market. For the investigation, this is the final dead end on the material side. Now, even if new suspicions arise, it is almost impossible to test them on the vessel itself. The scene of events has effectively been erased. Sarm's family says openly that this step raises very heavy questions for them. Bain himself has never publicly explained his motives for the sale, but this entire sale remains in the history of the case as the moment after which the hope of finding the truth through physical evidence almost dissolves. The hope of finding the truth through physical evidence almost dissolves. And then the family turns its anger on those who were supposed to be looking for that truth. For years, Brenda Street and those close to Sarm publicly criticized the Virgin Islands police, and they have very concrete reasons for it. First, the very first report of Sarm's disappearance made on the overnight dispatch line was never recorded. The investigation has no audio file. There is no record of Bain's words in the form he actually spoke them in the first hours. For any serious investigation, this is a huge failure. Second, video recordings from the cameras at the restaurant and the pier, where Sarm is seen for the last time, are shown to the family in a strange way. Some fragments are played for them, and then the playback is stopped, citing internal regulations. Whole pieces of video remain inaccessible to the public for years. Third, the inspection of the catamaran took too long. The warrant appeared only after 11 hours. A full forensic examination was never carried out. Fourth, communication with the family. Sarm's relatives live in England. For months they receive no clear updates from the island's police. Their letters go unanswered. They end up learning about their own case from the newspapers. In 2024, an important event takes place. The Virgin Islands Police Commissioner resigns. His departure coincides with general criticism of the department's actions in a number of cases, and Sarm's case appears in that list as one of the loudest examples. By that time, the case itself is officially transferred to the Office of the Territory's Attorney General. Formally, this is a raising of the level of the investigation. Federal agents continue their work, but years after that March night, no charges have been filed against anyone in Sarm's death. The system acknowledges its failures only partially and far too late, and the time that could have been used can no longer be brought back. The time that could have been used can no longer be brought back. But the story of Sarm Heslop does not surrender to the archive. In September of 2025, a major project that the family had been waiting for 4.5 years airs on British television. It is a BBC documentary series called Missing in Paradise, Searching for Sarm. 3 episodes air on BBC Two from September 17th through September 19th, 2025. The series then appears on the BBC streaming service. Viewers see for the first time what had been hidden until then. The program shows previously unpublished footage from the cameras on the pier. In that footage, Sarm and Ryan walk down to the dinghy, get into it, and head off into the darkness of the bay. This is the last filming of Sarm in life. For her family, it is both a long-awaited moment of proof and the hardest scene they have ever had to watch. Ryan Bain's response comes almost immediately. On September 19th, 2025, the day the final episode airs, he posts an open letter on social media. It is his first public statement after more than 4 years of complete silence. In the letter, he complains about how his story has been covered in the press. He attaches documents about his divorce from Corey Stevenson. He shares links to files. But there is one thing missing from that letter. There are no words about Sarm, no version of what happened that night, no answer to the main question that keeps this story alive. Sarm's parents reply briefly and with restraint. They say, "We ask him to speak with the police and to share any information he may have. Sarm Heslop has never been found. The case is not officially closed. Ryan Bain has not been charged with anything to this day and goes on living an ordinary life. And the man who was beside her in her last hours on Siren Song still does not answer any questions about that night." Dawn, September 15th, 2014. The tropical island of Koh Tao in Thailand, Serai Beach. A cleaner finds 2 bodies near a rock, 23 and 24 years old. Hannah Witheridge and David Miller, 2 British tourists who had met at a bar the night before and decided to walk back to their bungalows together. 2 weeks later, police will announce they have found the culprits, 2 Burmese workers, who will be brought to a press conference in handcuffs. A few days after that, those men will retract their confessions and describe being tortured. This is the story of how an investigation turned into a political show, and how the question of who was really on that beach that night remained wide open. Koh Tao sits in the Gulf of Thailand like a small green dot, just 21 square kilometers of land ringed by coral reefs. On a map, it looks like the perfect pause between noisy Phuket and the festival island of Koh Phangan. Travel brochures call it a diver's paradise. Warm water, visibility up to 30 meters, cheap diving courses. Every year, tens of thousands of young travelers from every continent come here, especially from the United Kingdom. Backpackers, recent graduates, couples at the start of long journeys. But this paradise has a second reputation, one you rarely find in the brochures. By 2014, among people who follow the news out of Thailand closely, Koh Tao is known as an island from which people regularly do not come back. Over the preceding years, several young tourists have died here under strange circumstances. Some are found in the water, some in their bungalows, some at the foot of cliffs. The official explanations almost always come down to 2 phrases: taking one's own life or an accident. Relatives who fly in to identify the bodies often challenge those conclusions, but their complaints tend to vanish inside the local system. Life on the island is held together by a handful of family clans. They own the land, the bars, the dive schools, the bungalows, the piers. One of them has controlled a significant stretch of the coast for decades. The land, the bars, the piers all belong to people from one large family. The local police force is small and tightly connected to all of these people through blood, friendship, and shared business. At night, the island comes alive on Serai Beach. It is a long strip of white sand lined with bars, loungers, fire shows, and bonfires by the water. Here strangers meet, music plays, sparklers crackle. Officially, it is entertainment. Unofficially, it is a place where hundreds of intoxicated people from different countries cross paths every night. And all of them, arriving there, believe they are safe. Hannah Witheridge believes in that safety too. She is 23 from Great Yarmouth, a small seaside town in the English county of Norfolk. Her family is well known in the local community. Her father works as a dentist. Her mother runs the home. There are sisters. Hannah is just finishing a master's degree in speech and language therapy at the University of Essex. Her dream is to work with people for whom speaking comes with difficulty, those learning to talk again after injury and illness. Her teachers and friends describe her as attentive, calm, and at the same time, very full of life. Before starting her career, Hannah plans a holiday. She books a ticket to Thailand with 2 close friends. It is a classic route for graduates: Bangkok, then the islands, 2 weeks of beach and diving. On September 11th, 2014, their ferry docks at Koh Tao. They check into a small bungalow complex, ocean view, on Serai Beach. In the evening photos she sends home, you see a tanned face, a wide smile, an ordinary vacation of an ordinary British girl. At the same time, without knowing Hannah, David Miller arrives on the island. He is 24. He is from Jersey, a Channel island formerly tied to the British Crown. He has recently graduated from the engineering faculty of the University of Leeds, earned his diploma, and for the first time can afford a long journey. His older brother Michael travels with him. Like Hannah, they stay at the Ocean View bungalows. Their bungalow is just a few steps from hers. Until the evening of September 14th, their paths never cross. They visit different beaches, eat at different places, read different guidebooks. Two young Britons at the start of adult life, each with their own plans, their own companions, their own trajectory. Neither of them yet knows that very soon these trajectories will meet at a single point. That point is the AC Bar, a small wooden place right on Sari Beach. An open veranda, a counter on the sand, speakers blasting music. The bar belongs to a local Thai family. One of the owner's sons runs it. Every evening, dozens of tourists stop by to watch the fire shows, to drink local whiskey and cola, to chat with strangers. On September 14th, 2014, Hannah and her friends come here after dinner. They sit at one of the tables by the bar and order drinks. A little later, David appears, also with acquaintances. He notices her at the counter, approaches, starts talking. According to the bartender and friends on both sides, they talk easily and for a long time. They laugh, show each other something on their phones, discuss plans for the coming days. For both of them, it is an ordinary friendly acquaintance on holiday. Nothing serious, no pressure. The bar's surveillance cameras capture them sitting next to each other around midnight. On one of the recordings, you can see David saying something, Hannah laughing and flipping her hair back. They are not drinking heavily, their movements are calm. Around 1 in the morning, the AC Bar begins to close. Some of the group leave early. Others stay to finish their drinks. David offers to walk Hannah back to her bungalow. The two complexes are close, 10 minutes along the beach. They leave together along the beach path that runs toward the northern end of Sari, to the spot where the bars end and a dark stretch by the rocks begins. Several witnesses will later recall seeing them on that stretch. A young couple walking slowly, talking. No sign of conflict or threat. These are the last confirmed images of Hannah and David alive. What happened between that moment and dawn, no one who could speak publicly about it truly knows. Those few hours will become the central riddle of everything that follows. Over the island, the tropical night stretches on in silence. Waves roll up the sand, birds call in the jungle. A faint pale strip begins to appear on the horizon. At around 6:20 in the morning, on September 15th, a cleaner walks out onto the beach. He has a familiar route to pick up bottles, cigarette butts, plastic left over from the parties. He walks from the center of Sari toward the northern edge, where the beach narrows and meets a small cliff. At the base of that cliff, he sees something that shouldn't be on a dawn beach. Two figures. One is right at the water's edge, the surf already washing over the feet. The second is a few steps higher up, on the wet sand. Coming closer, he realizes they are bodies. David's body lies on his back. The nature of the injuries makes it clear this was a violent death. From first observations, in his final minutes, he was at the water's edge. Nearby lies Hannah's body. The marks on her make it clear this was something more than a fall, and it was no accident. A few steps from them, a garden hoe with a short metal blade has been thrown onto the sand. It will later be recorded as a possible weapon. The cleaner runs to the nearest hotel and bangs on the reception door. They call the police station. The first patrol officers reach the beach 30 or 40 minutes later. By that time, several locals, early tourists, and people holding up phones are already standing near the cliff. No one cordons off the scene. No one asks anyone to step back. As more cars arrive and the light grows stronger, more and more people gather around the cliff. The sun rises over the Gulf of Thailand, as it always does. Only now its light falls on two bodies, around which, within hours, an investigation will begin. One that will later become internationally known precisely for its procedural failings. The mistakes start in the first minutes. Local police do not bring in experts right away. While specialists fly from Bangkok, the bodies remain on the beach for several hours. The site is not covered with a tent, not taped off, not cordoned. The waves keep touching David's feet. The sand around them is gradually trampled by dozens of feet. Officers, witnesses, and simple onlookers. By 8 in the morning, news of the tragedy spreads across the island. Guests from nearby bungalows come to the rock. Some film on their phones, some try to take selfies with it in the background. Some of the images end up in local chats and messengers. Within a few hours, they are in the hands of Thai and foreign journalists. The world hears about what happened faster than the official agencies manage to put anything into words. Evidence is collected without strict procedure. The hoe is picked up and placed in an ordinary bag. Nearby, a cigarette butt is found, along with several biological traces and items of clothing. Most of the items are not photographed at the scene as they were first discovered. Some will later turn out to be either lost or to have a broken chain of custody. For the trial to come, this will become one of the main problems. The first official version announced at a briefing that same day is simple. The attack was committed by someone local, possibly a worker from one of the bars, possibly from the circle of the family that owns the AC bar. Police say the list of suspects is limited, and the answer will come quickly. By evening, the news is on the front pages of British papers. The faces of Hannah and David, smiling in holiday snapshots, appear on the main television channels. The British Embassy urgently sends staff to the island. The families fly out to Thailand, still not believing what is happening. And on Saray Beach, where everything happened that night, tourists keep taking photographs, and no one truly understands what has happened to the evidence in those first few hours. While the families fly to Thailand, police on the island make their first loud arrests. Among the earliest is the very same son of the AC bar's owner, the young man Hannah and David had seen just before they left. He is taken to the station, questioned for several hours. According to the official version, he immediately presents an alibi and soon leaves the station without charges. No official claims are made against him. Questions appear in the local and British press right away. The family that owns the AC bar is considered one of the most influential on Koh Tao. They own land, several bars and bungalows, and have connections to the authorities. Journalists point out that such a quick clearance requires either a perfectly documented alibi or a particular kind of treatment. No documented alibi is shown to the public in those early days. Meanwhile, the pressure builds. British papers run with headlines reminding readers every day. 2 young citizens of the United Kingdom have been killed in a popular tourist country, and there is still no answer. The authorities in Bangkok grow anxious. Tourism is one of the pillars of the Thai economy, and Koh Tao is one of its flagships. At that moment, the country's Prime Minister, General Prayut Chan-o-cha, makes a public statement that can no longer be struck from history. He tells journalists that female tourists who wear bikinis expose themselves to greater danger, unless, in his words, they are not pretty. That phrase is broadcast around the world and triggers a wave of outrage in Britain and in human rights circles. But behind the scenes, it has another effect. Inside the Thai system, it reads as a signal sent down the chain of command. This problem must be closed quickly and loudly. The island's police receive that message clearly. What they need now is not an investigation, but a result. And the result must be of a kind that leaves no one asking uncomfortable questions about influential local families. And there are figures within the island system that fit that role. They are the Burmese workers. Several hundred of them live on Koh Tao, young men from Rakhine and other poor regions of the neighboring country. They come here to wash dishes, carry crates, work in bars and on building sites. Many live without papers, in dormitories with 6 or 8 men to a room, and earn less than half of what Thais would be paid for the same work. In the days after the tragedy, police launch a mass operation on the island. Hundreds of migrants have DNA swabs taken by force. It is done quickly, without lawyers, sometimes without a translator, often on the principle of refuse and there will be problems with your papers. The workers agree. Most of them have no resources to refuse. 2 weeks after the tragedy, on October 2nd, 2014, police announced the arrest of 2 men. They are Zaw Lin and Wai Phio, both around 21, both from Myanmar. Both work on the neighboring island of Koh Phangan, but they travel regularly to Koh Tao. They have friends and occasional jobs in one of the bars here. According to police, their DNA matches samples collected from the spot where Hannah was found. They are brought before cameras of national and international channels at a press conference. They are in handcuffs, their faces full of confusion and fear. Journalists are shown a reconstructed version of what happened, including a reenactment on the beach featuring the detainees. They are charged with a double attack and a sexually motivated crime against Hannah. Police emphasize the case is solved, the guilty have been found, Justice on Koh Tao works. The Prime Minister gets to speak of the swift work of his security forces. The victims' families hear those statements from London, not yet having had time to understand the details. And behind the scenes, a parallel process is unfolding, one that the press conference does not mention at all. Behind the scenes, the interrogations. In the first 24 hours after arrest, both detainees, according to police, signed confessions. In these documents, according to the investigation, there is a picture that will later form the basis of the prosecution. A meeting on the beach, the attack on the couple, the use of the hoe, a sexually motivated crime against Hannah. Police present these papers as the main proof that their version is correct. However, within a few days, both men publicly retract their statements. They claim they were signing documents they could not read. They barely know Thai. Their English is poor. A Burmese translator, they say, was either absent altogether or present only as a formality. There were no lawyers at the moment of signing. Then they describe details that put international human rights organizations on alert. According to them, the interrogations went on without sleep and almost without food. In their account, pressure was applied in a way that was not supposed to leave visible traces. They say they were threatened with violence and, according to one of the detainees, a mock execution was staged. Both say the same thing. We signed so it would stop. The Thai side denies all of these claims. The Myanmar embassy confirms that consular officers were not allowed access to the detainees during those crucial first days. Amnesty International and the International Commission of Jurists record these complaints in writing and send inquiries to the Thai Foreign Ministry. Human rights advocates demand an independent medical examination. It takes place with a delay, and by that time, some of the possible traces are no longer visible. The Thai police deny everything. The heads of the investigation state that the interrogations were conducted in a standard manner with a translator present without pressure, but they never release a full video recording of the interrogations to the public. The individual fragments shown in the news are short, staged, and filmed after the papers had been signed. And here a problem emerges that the prosecution will live with all the way up to the Supreme Court. If the confessions are set aside, the investigation is left with only one serious piece of evidence, and around it, a large dispute of its own is forming. That evidence is DNA. At the first press conferences, the Thai police say that samples from the scene match the samples of Zaw Lin and Y Pheo. According to officials, the match is so complete that there can be no doubt. Later, this becomes the cornerstone of the entire prosecution. But as soon as international experts ask for the documentation, oddities begin. The British side, through diplomatic channels, requests the full materials of the examination: collection protocols, photographs of the packaging, analysis charts, laboratory data. Some of the materials arrive, some do not. In what does arrive, problems are already noticeable at the very first stage, back on the beach. Recall that the evidence in those first hours was collected without standard procedure. According to the defense and independent observers, bags, they say, were signed after the fact. No photographs were taken of the original positions, and the chain of custody was recorded only in part. For a DNA examination, this is critical. The slightest contamination in handling the sample can distort the result. Independent specialists point to one more important detail. At their request, the Thai Forensic Service was expected to provide the original biological samples for reanalysis in a neutral laboratory. According to the defense and international observers, by that time the samples had either been used up or were unavailable. That means that the claimed match cannot be independently verified. In 2015, BBC Panorama airs a major investigation called Thailand, the Dark Side of Paradise. Journalists meet with experts, show contradictions, publish documents. The Guardian and other outlets join in with their own reporting. The human rights organization, International Commission of Jurists, prepares a separate report on the procedural violations. The prosecution's reply is always the same. A scientific examination was conducted, the match was confirmed, there should be no questions. The defense answers that science without independent verification is not science, but a statement. And it is with this contradiction, confessions that were retracted plus DNA that cannot be rechecked, that the case enters the hall of a provincial court on the neighboring island. The trial opens in the provincial court on the island of Koh Samui in the summer of 2015. judges, prosecutors, translators, journalists, relatives. Zaw Lin and Y Fio are brought in under guard. Both look much thinner than in the first images of their arrest. They are given a Burmese translator. For the first time in the whole process, the procedure follows the rules. The prosecution speaks with confidence. The prosecutor presents the DNA examination, refers to the original confessions, shows the physical evidence, the hoe, the clothes, David's mobile phone, which according to the investigation ended up with the suspects. He argues that this chain is continuous and unambiguous, and that there is no other explanation for that night on the beach. The defense challenges every link in turn. The lawyers point out the failings at the beach. They remind the court that the confessions were withdrawn and came with complaints of pressure. They ask the court to admit independent experts who could assess the claimed DNA matches. The court refuses the request. All the key examinations remain in the hands of the same bodies that conducted the investigation. The trial lasts several months. Representatives of the British Embassy come to the courtroom, as do observers from the ICJ and Amnesty International. The press conveys the details to the world every day. But the atmosphere in the court, already by the middle of the trial, makes the direction clear. According to those present, motions from the prosecution are granted almost always. Motions from the defense, rarely. On December 24, 2015, the court delivers its verdict. Zaw Lin and Y Fio are found guilty on all the main charges. The punishment, the highest, the death penalty. The judge reads out the decision evenly, without emotion. The courtroom falls silent. Both defendants stand quietly, looking straight ahead. Next to them, their relatives weep. The news spreads around the world within the hour. In Myanmar, small spontaneous groups take to the streets demanding a review. In London, New York, and Brussels, human rights advocates issue official statements. Koh Tao sees a sharp drop in British tourist arrivals. A phrase takes hold in the press that cannot be removed: Death Island. That phrase becomes the lens through which the world now looks at the island and at the entire case. Major international organizations publish sharp statements in the first days after the verdict. Amnesty International calls the trial unfair and expresses concern that confessions obtained under pressure were admitted into the case. The ICJ details the procedural violations, the absence of independent examination, limited access for the defense, translation problems. The government of Myanmar formally asks Thailand to reconsider the decision. For Myanmar, this is not an ordinary story. Millions of its citizens work in neighboring countries, and the fate of two young men from Myanmar becomes a symbol of how defenseless they are. In Yangon and other cities, crowds march with portraits of the defendants. In London, members of parliament discuss how the British government should defend the interests of its citizens in cases like this. The question is raised: do we have the right to accept a verdict handed down on such a shaky evidentiary base? In public policy, no answer emerges. Diplomatic relations with Thailand are too important. At this point, the families of Hannah and David take different positions. The Miller family, in their official statement, says they trust the results of Thai justice and want to close this chapter. The Witheridge family is more careful. They say they still have serious questions about the quality of the investigation, and that it matters to them to hear the truth, not simply the name of a convict. British journalists keep working. New investigations and documentary films come out, featuring lawyers, human rights advocates, and experts. They include interviews with families on both sides, including the family of Zaw Lin in Myanmar. Meanwhile, tourism on the island falls. Some hotels close, some dive schools lose their clients. Local authorities try to save the reputation, but the phrase Death Island has already taken root both in travel forums and in headlines. Against this backdrop, the lawyers prepare their appeal. That appeal is heard in 2017. The lawyers for Zaw Lin and Y Fio put forward the same arguments: procedural failings, the retraction of confessions, the absence of an independent DNA examination. International observers join them, and consuls from Myanmar and the United Kingdom attend the courtroom. The judges hear both sides and deliver a decision that does not change the substance. The appeals court confirms the conviction and the highest penalty. The convicted men remain in Bangkwang prison near Bangkok, in one of the country's toughest blocks. the one where those sentenced to death are held. The regime is harsh: small cells, limited visits, long years of waiting. Relatives come from Myanmar rarely, and visits are measured in minutes. The lawyers keep preparing the appeal to the highest court. That appeal reaches the Supreme Court of Thailand. Consideration takes almost 2 years. The defense again asks for independent examinations, again brings up arguments about torture and procedural violations. The court requests the materials and listens to both sides. In August 2019, a final decision is issued, one that is supposed to put a stop to the legal part of the case. The decision is twofold. The Supreme Court finds the convicted men guilty. In substance, the verdict stands. But the death penalty is replaced with life imprisonment. Formally, the court refers to the confessions from the first days, holding that they provide grounds for leniency, that those confessions were long ago retracted. The court does not dwell on in any detail. For human rights advocates, this is a half victory. On the one hand, the lives of 2 young men are saved. They will not go to execution. On the other, the very structure of the verdict, in their view, remains shaky, and, as a consequence, possibly innocent men are receiving life in prison. The families of the British victims learn of the decision in London, from the news. The Millers accept it quietly. The Witheridges say once again that it does not give them a full answer to the main question, and the main question is still open. The main question is simple: who was really on Sari Beach on the night of September 14th to 15th, 2014? Legally, the answer has been given. In fact, it is not. In Myanmar, the names Zaw Lin and Wai Phio are still read as the names of victims of someone else's system. At demonstrations, placards with their faces are carried. In senior school classes, their story is studied as an example of how foreign justice can work against migrants. Their parents wait every year for a review. In their conviction, based on their son's words, the verdict does not match what happened that night. In Britain, the Witheridge family continues to speak about the case cautiously. They do not reject the possibility that the real guilty parties have been punished, but they do not assert it either. Their phrasing stays the same. Serious questions remain, and they want the truth, not just a court document. The Miller family prefers not to comment any further. On Koh Tao, according to the local press and human rights groups, a series of suspicious tourist deaths has not received a single unified explanation in the years that followed either. Each case was examined separately. No linked investigation was carried out. The island's reputation recovers slowly, years after the tragedy. The questions that remain for journalists and independent lawyers are not only about names, they are about the system. How a crime scene could be left open to photographs by outsiders. How DNA evidence could end up being both the only piece of evidence and one that cannot be verified. How confessions made without a lawyer or a translator could stay in the case file after a person had retracted them. The names Hannah Witheridge and David Miller have taken their place on the international lists of high-profile stories, where the legal ending and the factual truth turned out to stand far apart. They are cases used to teach journalism students and young lawyers what tourism, big money, and pressure from above can do to an investigation. 2 young Britons walked out of a bar on the beach one evening and did not come back. 2 Burmese migrants have been held in a Thai prison for more than 10 years. Whether that was the real answer stayed where it began, on the night beach of Sari. On the 30th of May, 2010, in Lima, inside a casino in the Miraflores district, a 21-year-old woman named Stephany Flores sits down at a poker table and, a few hours later, walks out to a hotel with a man whose name is known to the entire international press. On that exact same day, 5 years earlier, on the other side of the planet, on the Caribbean island of Aruba, an 18-year-old American named Natalie Holloway vanished. Her body was never found. And the prime suspect in her case, detained twice and released twice, is now sitting across the table from a Peruvian student. How did a man with that kind of history end up in Lima? And why, between those 2 dates, had exactly 5 years passed, day for day? Lima wakes up slowly, and its nightlife is only hitting full stride around 3 in the morning. In the Miraflores district, inside the Atlantic City Casino, the lights are burning, the chips are clicking, and a tournament is underway. On the night of the 30th of May, 2010, a 21-year-old woman walks into the hall wearing jeans and a light jacket. Her name is Stephany Tatiana Flores Ramirez. She is a student at the Business School of the University of Applied Sciences, UPC, and she has been playing poker at a serious level for several years already. She moves between the tables calmly, like someone who has been there many times before. The casino cameras record her movements at exactly 3 in the morning. Stephany stops beside a table where a thin young man with European features is sitting. He is 22 years old. He is playing in the Latin American poker tour, and he is staying nearby, in a modest place called Hotel Tac. His name is Joran van der Sloot. They exchange a few words. Stephany sits down next to him. The game goes on for several hours. By 5 in the morning, the two of them leave the casino together and get into a taxi. A few minutes later, the Hotel TAC cameras record them walking into the lobby. The elevator carries them up to room 309. On that same day, the 30th of May, in another part of the world, exactly 5 years have passed since the night an 18-year-old American named Natalie Holloway disappeared on Aruba. Her body was never found. In that case, one man had been considered the prime suspect the whole time, a man the Aruban police had detained twice and released twice for lack of evidence. It was the same Joran van der Sloot who was now opening the door to his room in Lima. The coincidence of the date would strike everyone the following week, when every major news agency in the world would write about it. But on that very night, no one in Lima yet knew whose name was written on the registration card at Hotel TAC. To understand the scale of this story inside Peru, it helps to know who the young woman sitting down at the casino table really was. Stephany Tatiana Flores Ramirez was born in Lima, into a family that needed no introduction in the country. Her father, Ricardo Flores Lama, was a well-known businessman and a former presidential candidate who had spent years in motor racing and construction. Her mother ran the household and raised 5 children. Stephany was the youngest of them, and from early childhood, she was seen as the favorite of the family. She was studying at a private university of applied sciences, in the business school program. At the same time, she worked with her father on family projects, handling paperwork, traveling to events, understanding how motor racing worked from the inside. She was often spotted in the pits, in gloves and a team jacket. But her real passion was poker. She came to poker not for easy money. What drew her in was the mechanics of the game itself, the calculation, the discipline, the reading of an opponent. She read books on theory, played online, took part in local tournaments. By the age of 20, she was already a recognized name at poker tables across Latin America. Relatives described her as stubborn and independent. She did not like being driven or escorted. She decided everything herself: where to go, when to come back, who to talk to. On the night of the 30th of May, 2010, she arrived at the Atlantic City Casino alone, in her own car. In her bag, she carried her documents, a small amount of cash, her keys, and her phone. At that moment, Stephany had no idea she would become one of the most talked about figures in Peruvian criminal history. That night, she was simply an athletic, ambitious young woman who had come to play a tournament. Everything that was about to happen would tie her name to a man from whom, on another continent, a different family had been waiting for answers for years. That other family, the one that had been waiting for 5 years, lived in Alabama, and the name of the man they were waiting on was well known to the world press. Joran van der Sloot came from Aruba, a small island in the Caribbean. His father, Paulus, had worked for years as a school principal and later as a judge. The family was well off, respectable, and embedded in the local elite. In the spring of 2005, a group of graduates from a high school in Mountain Brook, in the United States, traveled to the island. Among them was 18-year-old Natalie Holloway. On the night of the 29th to the 30th of May, the young woman left a club together with a group of young men. One of them was 17-year-old Joran. According to every testimony, he was the last person to see her alive. By morning, Natalie had not returned to her hotel. Her body would never be found. The Aruban police detained Joran twice. He changed his story several times. First, he said he had dropped the young woman off near her hotel. Then he said she had felt sick on the beach, that he had panicked, and asked a friend to help him cover it up. Then he retracted everything again. Each time he was released. There was no direct evidence, no body, no witnesses. By 2010, Natalie Holloway was considered deceased in the United States. Her mother, Beth, spent years running her own investigation, giving interviews, testifying before Congress. Joran, meanwhile, moved around Europe and Latin America, took part in poker tournaments, and lived off his parents' money and occasional winnings. The news wrote about him regularly, but legally he was a free man. In the autumn of 2009, the FBI began taking an interest in him. Duran proposed a deal to Natalie's mother. He would reveal the location of her daughter's body in exchange for money. The U.S. prosecutors started setting up a trap, but while the lawyers were still working out the wording, Duran himself had already bought a ticket to Lima. A poker tournament was waiting for him there, at the Atlantic City Casino. That tournament in Lima was not a local event. At the end of May 2010, the Atlantic City Casino was hosting one of the stops of the Latin American Poker Tour, a major series with prize pools running into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Players from many countries were flying into Miraflores. For the city, those were profitable days. Full hotels, crowded tables, nightlife at its peak. Duran van der Sloot flew into Peru a few days before the final. He did not check into an expensive hotel. He settled into the modest Hotel TAC, a small building 2 blocks from the casino. His room, 309, was plain and unremarkable. That choice saved money and let him return quickly after each session. Stephany came to the casino almost every evening of the tournament. She played several stages, held her own, though she did not make it to the final. By the end of the week, the dealers and the waiters in the hall already recognized her. To them, she was not just the Flores surname, but a calm, focused player. The night from the 29th to the 30th of May was the last big night of the series. Around 3 a.m, Stephany walked in, sat down at one of the tables, and quickly found herself across from Duran. A short conversation started between them, first about the game, then broader. He spoke English and Spanish. She spoke both languages fluently. Duran was playing well. By the morning, he had a noticeable win, by various estimates around $5,000. Stephany did not brag about her own results, but she stayed at the table beside him. Around 5 a.m, the two of them walked out of the casino together. They did not go to her car. They got into a taxi. The cameras recorded them driving off in the direction of Hotel TAS. To the rest of the world, it was still just an ordinary post-tournament scene. 2 young people, a meeting, a walk to the hotel. Nobody in the hall that night imagined they were seeing the last public appearance of Stephany Flores. At Hotel TAC, they went up to room 309 at around 5:30 in the morning. Inside the room, only the two of them remained. From that moment on, any timeline can no longer be built from direct testimony, but only from camera footage, forensic examinations, and Duran's own words. Later, inside the offices of the Peruvian investigators, he would give several versions. The main one, the one he publicly stuck with, went like this. At some point, Stephany picked up his laptop without permission. On the screen, according to him, were materials about the Holloway case, articles, photographs, links. The young woman started asking questions. Duran claimed that those questions made him lose control. According to the forensic findings, the investigation determined the time of death as the morning of the 30th of May. That date, as the whole world now knows, matches day for day the disappearance of Natalie Holloway 5 years earlier. After what happened, Duran remained in the room for several more hours. He did not flee immediately. According to the investigation, he changed clothes, gathered his belongings, took cash, documents, bank cards, and the phone out of the young woman's bag. He tidied up the room, not perfectly, but well enough to buy himself time. On the outside door handle, he hung a "Do Not Disturb" sign. It is an ordinary hotel detail, but this detail became the main instrument of his escape. The staff at Hotel Talks did not enter the room for the next several days. Around noon on the 30th of May, Duran walked down into the lobby with a backpack and a small bag. On the cameras, he moves calmly, without rushing, nods to the receptionist, and steps out onto the street. From that moment on, his journey south began, toward the border with Chile. And in room 309, behind a closed door, Stephany remained, and for 3 more days no one would look for her inside the hotel. While the sign hung on the door of room 309, a different scene was playing out on the streets of Lima. Duran caught a taxi and headed south. By the evening of the 30th of May, he was already in Ica, and then moved on toward Tacna, the Peruvian city on the border with Chile. At the checkpoint, he crossed the border using his own passport under his real name. On that day, his surname was not yet flagged in any wanted database. On the Chilean side, he boarded a bus to the city of Arica. and from there continued on to Santiago. The journey was long, several days. The whole time, Duran behaved as if nothing had happened. He paid by card in cafes, took taxis, called acquaintances. These actions would later be reconstructed by investigators in 2 countries through records and bank statements. Meanwhile, in Lima, the alarm was rising along a different line. Stephany did not come home on the 30th of May. Her father, Ricardo Flores, used to his daughter always being in touch, started calling every possible number that same day. Her friends said they had seen her at the casino. In the parking lot at Atlantic City, her car was still sitting, left there from the previous night. The family went to the police. The casino camera footage was pulled, and on it there is a clear moment when Stephany walks out with Duran. The cameras near Hotel Tas confirmed the route to the hotel. The circle narrowed very quickly. On the 2nd of June, a housekeeper approached room 309. The Do Not Disturb sign was still hanging there, but too much time had gone by. She knocked, received no answer, and, following hotel protocol, opened the door. Inside, she found Stephany. The room was in disarray with clear signs of what had happened. From that moment, the case turned from a missing person report into a homicide investigation. And the man whose name was written on the registration card had already crossed one border and was moving toward the second. That name changed everything. On the registration card at Hotel TAC was written, Joran van der Sloot, nationality, the Netherlands. He had not used an alias, had not hidden, had not bribed the receptionist. He had checked in as an ordinary guest. For a Peruvian police officer, that name meant little in the first minutes. A Dutchman, arrived for a tournament, paid for a room. But within a few hours, the registration data reached the hands of journalists. The surname van der Sloot was instantly recognized in newsrooms from New York to Amsterdam. Linking Lima with Aruba in 2005 was not a task for an investigator, but for anyone with access to the internet. On the evening of the 2nd of June, the first reports went out to global news agencies. The prime suspect in the old Holloway case was connected to the death of a young Peruvian woman. Within a day, the stories of the 2 young women merged into a single news cycle. The coincidence of the date, the 30th of May, became the headline. The Peruvian police issued an international wanted notice and passed the data on to Interpol and their Chilean colleagues. At the Tacna to Arica border, they checked whether Duran had crossed that point. He had, and under his own name. The direction of travel was clear, south towards Santiago. Stephany's father, Ricardo Flores, received final confirmation on that same day that his daughter was dead. He stepped out before the press, saying little, composed. He said he would personally accompany every stage of the investigation and the trial. He held to that line to the end. In the years that followed, he would be seen at almost every key hearing in Lima and beyond. Chilean police tracked Duran through card payments in Santiago. They knew the general area where he was staying, followed his movements through cameras and taxis. On the 3rd of June, 3 days after Stephany's death, a police unit arrested him in the Chilean capital. He barely resisted. Everything that had happened since the casino in Miraflores now went into the official record. Chile moved quickly. With international attention focused on the case, the Chilean authorities did not drag out the procedure. Within the first week after his arrest, Duran was handed over to Peru. The expedited extradition went ahead on the basis of mutual agreements and a direct request from Lima. On the 4th of June, he was put in handcuffs, placed on a plane, and delivered to the Peruvian capital under guard. In Lima, he was placed in a special unit at the prosecutor's office. He was given a defense lawyer and a translator. On the 7th of June, 2010, Joran van der Sloot gave his first detailed confession. He said that he had brought Stephany to room 309, and that a conflict had erupted between them that led to tragic consequences. In his version, everything started with the laptop. The young woman had supposedly opened the screen, seen materials about the Holloway case, and started asking questions. He described the scene in detail, showed investigators the room, reconstructed his escape route. Peruvian lawyers logged the confession as voluntary, given in the presence of the defense. The record of his statement was signed and certified. A few weeks later, Duran would try to walk it all back. He would claim he had been pressured by the Peruvian police. He would then add that he had been set up by the FBI to close the Holloway case. These claims looked unconvincing, Neither the defense team nor independent observers had recorded any coercion. On the 25th of June, 2010, a Peruvian judge issued a separate ruling recognizing the confession as legal and admissible. No grounds were found to exclude the testimony from the future trial. From that moment on, the defense could only work on the classification of the crime and the sentence, not on the fact itself. In Peru, meanwhile, a public debate was rising. People were asking, how could a man whose name had been tied for years to the death of another young woman freely fly to Lima, settle in 2 blocks from a casino, and spend an entire night there with a 20-year-old student? That question went beyond a single case and became part of a broader conversation about the responsibility of states that release suspects for lack of evidence. That conversation about the responsibility of states ran in parallel with the preparation of the trial. A year and a half passed between the arrest and the verdict. Joran was held in the Miguel Castro prison outside Lima. During that time, the case accumulated forensic reports, interrogations, and international correspondence. The defense changed lawyers and tried in various ways to reduce the charges. The trial officially began in January 2012. On the 11th of January, inside a Lima courtroom, Joran van der Sloot admitted his guilt in the death of Stephany Flores. His defense asked for the case to be reclassified as a crime of passion, which would have meant a shorter sentence and a very different legal weight. The prosecution pushed back hard. The charges underlined that his actions before and after the act were composed. A man who has just committed a crime does not run off in panic. He hangs a sign on the door, takes money and documents, changes his clothes, and calmly walks out of the hotel. That sequence does not fit the idea of a crime of passion. On the 13th of January 2012, the panel of judges read out the verdict. Joran van der Sloot was found guilty and sentenced to 28 years in prison. In addition, the court ordered him to pay the Flora family $75,000 in compensation. Ricardo Flora heard the verdict in the courtroom. According to journalists present, he barely moved and his face barely changed. After the session, he stepped out in front of the cameras and said that this was only part of justice. Full justice, he said, no court could deliver because his daughter would not come back. Joran was transferred to the maximum security prison of Piedras Gordas. Later, he would be moved to Chalapalca, one of the most remote penal colonies in Peru, high in the mountains, at about 4,500 meters above sea level. This was done for safety reasons, both his and the other inmates. In Lima, the case was formally closed. But together with the verdict, the question was raised again in Peru. What exactly had happened 5 years earlier on Aruba? And did the Peruvian court close that story, at least in part? The question of what happened on Aruba was not being asked for the first time in those days. But the 2012 verdict brought Natalie Holloway's name back onto the front pages with new force. The 2 stories were finally woven into one. On one side, a family in Alabama. Natalie's mother, Beth Holloway, had spent years pushing the authorities not to close her daughter's case. She traveled to Aruba, met with local investigators, testified before the U.S. Congress. She also founded a support fund for parents of missing children. By 2012, her name was known in the United States almost as widely as her daughter's. On the other side, a family in Lima. Ricardo Flores, Stephany's father, after the verdict turned his personal grief into public work. He pushed for tougher penalties for serious crimes in Peru, supported reforms on the protection of women, took part in conferences about safety in hotels and public spaces. The 2 families got in touch directly. In interviews and open letters, Beth Holloway and Ricardo Flores kept repeating the same point. This should not have happened twice. Between the 2 dates, the 30th of May, 2005, and the 30th of May, 2010, exactly 5 years had passed. Within one system, not enough links had worked to prevent the second story from happening. Journalists in both countries returned to this coincidence again and again. It was too symmetrical to be just a catchy headline, and too heavy to be just raw material for documentaries. The day, the city, the age, the context, everything fit into a pattern that criminologists would go on analyzing for a long time. Joran himself, in the Peruvian prison, continued giving interviews. He asked to be transferred to the Netherlands, appealed to international standards, tried to shorten his sentence. In those interviews, he never once took responsibility for Natalee Holloway. But the subject of Aruba kept coming up in every conversation. For both families, that meant one thing. As long as he stayed silent about Aruba, neither of the stories could be considered closed. Staying silent about Aruba worked in favor not only of Duran, but also of his defense. However, alongside the Peruvian case, a separate proceeding had already been opening in the United States. It did not concern Natalee's death, but Duran's attempt to profit from her disappearance. In the autumn of 2009, before Lima, he had reached out to Natalee's mother through a go-between. Duran offered her a deal. For $250,000, he would point out the place where her daughter's remains could be found. Beth Holloway passed the story on to the FBI. The operation went ahead under the control of American agents. Duran received part of the sum, $25,000, and gave the coordinates. The place turned out to be false. For American law, that was enough to charge him with extortion and fraud. But in 2010, Duran was already sitting in Peru, and American prosecutors understood that they would have to wait a long time for extradition. Peru was not ready to let him go before he had served the main part of his sentence. Another 10 years went by. During that time, Duran was moved between prisons several times, married a local woman while incarcerated, and became the subject of documentary films. But his U.S. case did not go away. In 2023, the situation shifted. After diplomatic negotiations, the Peruvian authorities approved a temporary extradition of Duran to the United States for the Holloway case. In June 2023, he was delivered to Alabama. A deal with the prosecution was already in place. Duran agreed to plead guilty to extortion and, for the first time, gave testimony about the events of May 2005. According to him, he and Natalee had ended up alone on a beach on Aruba. A conflict had arisen between them that led to her death. In his version, he had then concealed what happened. For Beth Holloway, this was the first official account of what had happened to her daughter. She was in the courtroom, listened to the recording, and later stepped out to the press, saying she had finally received the answer she had been waiting for, though not full justice. That answer was important not only in Alabama. In Lima, Ricardo Flores was following the American process as closely as he had once followed the Peruvian one. Duran's admission in the United States meant, for the Flores family, that the man who had ended up in room 309 with their daughter was not a random traveler who had lost control in Lima, but a figure with a long and heavy history. At the end of the Alabama trial, Duran was handed an additional sentence, a lengthy term in the extortion case. After that, he was returned to Peru to continue serving his main sentence for the death of Stephany. Under Peruvian law, the terms partially overlap and partially add up. In any case, his possible release has been pushed far into the future, well past the 2030s. In Peru, the Stephany Flores case became not just a crime story, but part of a wider discussion. People talked about how hotels operate, where guests hang a "do not disturb" sign on the door, and no one reacts for 3 days. They talked about the vetting of casino visitors. They talked about how international suspects move freely between countries. After the verdict, Hotel TAC lost part of its clientele. The reputation of that small hotel in Miraflores became inseparable from room 309. A few years later, the building changed owners and signs, but for the people of the city, the place remained the same. The one where, in May 2010, the life of a young woman was cut short. The Natalee Holloway case in Alabama and the Stephany Flores case in Lima were finally brought under a single common denominator. Both stories involved the same man. Both stories carried the same question. Why had there been 5 years between them, during which no one had been able to put an end to it? And as long as Duran van der Sloot remains a living inmate in a Peruvian prison, both families have to wait, hoping that no new names are added to this list. The hopes that no new names will appear come from different sources for the two families. For the Holloways, they lie in the work of American prosecutors and foundations. For the Flores family, they lie in the efforts that the father has continued to make ever since the verdict. After 2012, Ricardo Flores did not step away from the public stage in Peru. He spoke openly. His daughter cannot be brought back, but it is possible to make sure that there are fewer stories like hers. He supported programs for victims, took part in legislative debates, often appeared on air whenever the conversation turned to the protection of women in public spaces. His voice was heard because he was not an abstract expert, but a father who had been through the whole process, from the first call in the night to the last hearing. The family set up charitable projects tied to Stephany's memory. Her name appears in materials from Peruvian universities and in the interviews of players who grew up on the Latin American poker scene. For many of them, she remains one of the recognizable figures of her generation, not because of the tragedy, but because of the way she played and the way she carried herself at the table. The case has a wide documentary trail. In the United States, the Netherlands, and Peru, films have been made. Major journalistic investigations, books, and podcasts have been released. Each new wave of attention brings the same pair of dates back into view: the 30th of May, 2005, and the 30th of May, 2010. And the main question with which this story began remains its final question. Why did no one stop Joran van der Sloot between Aruba and Lima? Why were 2 arrests on a small Caribbean island and 5 years of press attention not enough to prevent him, 5 years later, from sitting down at a table with a 20-year-old student in a Peruvian casino? An answer that would satisfy both the Holloway family and the Flore family does not exist to this day. There are only 2 verdicts, 2 prisons, and 2 dates, which remain forever in the memory of 2 families on opposite sides of a continent. On the 24th of March, 1998, a father steps out onto the balcony of a cruise ship cabin and sees an empty deck chair. Half an hour earlier, his 23-year-old daughter had been asleep in it. On the small side table, there's a pack of cigarettes, a lighter, and her sandals by the door. Her purse, passport, and money are all still in the cabin. At that very moment, the ship is pulling into the port of Curaçao. The man overboard alarm will never be sounded. The gangways are open, and thousands of passengers are already streaming onto the shore. A month later, a pair of Canadian tourists will spot a woman on a beach with the very same tattoos. A year after that, an American sailor will overhear the name Amy Bradley in a bar in Willemstad. And 27 years on, her mother will still be saying her daughter is alive. Amy Lynn Bradley grows up in a quiet suburb of Chesterfield, Virginia. Her parents, Ron and Iva, are ordinary middle-class Americans. Neat house, a dog, neighbors they know by name. There are 2 kids in the family, Amy and her younger brother Brad, with whom she's probably closer than with anyone her own age. By 23, Amy is already a graduate of Longwood University. She's earned a degree in physical education, a water safety instructor certification, and has several years of experience as a lifeguard. Water isn't some foreign element to her. It's a core part of who she is. She's a strong swimmer, confident over long distances, and level-headed in an emergency. That detail is worth holding on to. Every theory about what happened to her will eventually run up against that fact. Amy has just landed her first real professional offer. She's been hired by the consulting firm Computer Sciences Corporation. Adult life is about to begin. She has a dog named Bo that she adopted. She has friends, an apartment, plans. She has personality, stubborn, upbeat, a little sassy. There are several tattoos on her body, a green lizard on her right shoulder blade, the Tasmanian devil on her stomach, a sun on her lower back, a Chinese character on her ankle. Each one has its own story, and each one will later become a marker used to search for her. In early March of 1998, her parents decide to give both of their kids a joint gift and book a family Caribbean cruise. On the 21st, the whole family boards a Royal Caribbean liner called Rhapsody of the Seas. The route runs through the southern Caribbean, with stops including Aruba and Curaçao. The first few days unfold exactly as the parents had imagined: shared dinners, beaches, excursions, photos on deck. In those pictures, Amy is smiling, squinting into the sun. None of the 4 of them yet knows that those last snapshots are the ones they'll be holding on to forever. On March 23rd, the second-to-last evening of the cruise arrives. By morning, the ship is due to reach Curaçao, and passengers are trying to squeeze every last drop out of the trip. The Bradley family sits down to dinner together in the main dining room. Ron and Eva are tired after a long day ashore. They want quiet and sleep. Amy and Brad are still full of energy. Brother and sister exchange a glance and agree to spend the last night the way 20-somethings usually spend their last night on vacation. After dinner, they head up to the Viking Crown Lounge, a glass-walled room on the upper deck that turns into a nightclub after dark. On stage, the ship's house band, Blue Orchid, is playing. A Caribbean group, Royal Caribbean, had hired to entertain the passengers. One of the musicians, a bass player who goes by the stage name Yellow, real name Alistair Douglas, mingles with the crowd near the stage during the breaks. That night, Amy dances, chats with the musicians on their breaks, and laughs. Other passengers snap pictures in the lounge. In several of those shots, Amy is standing next to Yellow. She's smiling into the camera. He's just behind her. Those photos will later end up in every file on the case, printed and reprinted thousands of times. Yellow will later be among the first people the FBI speaks with. After their review, investigators find no direct evidence against him, and he is never officially named a suspect. Brad is right there the whole time. Later, he'll give investigators a detailed account of what went on in the lounge. According to him, his sister had been drinking, but she was in control. She wasn't stumbling, she wasn't blacking out. She didn't look lost. The conversation with the band was nothing more than the kind of chat you have on a dance floor. Nothing a Big Brother's radar would have flagged. The party stretches well past midnight. Around 3 in the morning, Amy and Brad realize the ship will be docking at Curaçao soon and decide to head back. They leave the lounge, make their way down the corridors and stairs to the 8th deck, and together walk to cabin 8188, where their parents are sleeping. At this point, Amy is still alive, still in reasonably good spirits, and completely within her brother's line of sight. At around 3:30 in the morning, Amy and Brad step into the family cabin. Their parents are asleep in the main bedroom, the door pulled shut. In the living area, there's a pull-out couch, and Brad flops down on it. He's exhausted. He kicks off his shoes, collapses against the pillow, and is out before he even registers what's going on around him. Amy doesn't go to bed right away. She steps out onto the balcony, settles into her usual plastic deck chair, and lights a cigarette. The sea beyond the railing is black. The steady rush of water sounds along the hull. The ship is heading toward Curaçao at this hour, the air already warm and heavy. Amy smokes, stares out into the darkness, and on the little table next to the chair sit her pack of cigarettes and her lighter. Her sandals are right next to the balcony door. She'd slipped them off the moment she stepped outside. Around 5:15, Ron wakes up the way he usually does. He doesn't really need to be up until 6, but he rises a little earlier and walks out into the living area. Through the open balcony door, he sees his daughter. Amy is lying in the deck chair, apparently having dozed off after finishing her cigarette. Ron doesn't want to wake her. They have a full day in port ahead. He decides to let her sleep another half hour. He goes back to the bedroom, lies down next to his wife, and closes his eyes. That moment is the last time anyone in the family confirms, with certainty, that Amy was alive. Her father will never forgive himself for simply walking past. If he had said even a word to her, if he had touched her shoulder, if he had brought her back inside, everything that came next might have gone differently. But instead, he shuts the door and lets her sleep. Between that glance and the next time Ron steps out again, about 30 minutes pass. The ship is moving toward shore. The onboard clocks are counting down the last miles to port. And in the neighboring cabins, passengers are already packing their suitcases. And in those same 30 minutes, something happens on the balcony of cabin 8188 that to this day no one has been able to reconstruct. During those 30 minutes, Ron manages to doze off a little. Around 6, he opens his eyes again and gets up for good. Out beyond the porthole, the sky is already brightening, and the ship is clearly slowing down. Up ahead is the port of Willemstad, the capital of Curaçao. Ron walks into the living area, past the couch where his son is still asleep, and turns toward the balcony door. The deck chair is empty. The pack of cigarettes and the lighter are still sitting on the little table, as though they'd just been set down. The sandals are still by the threshold, exactly as they were half an hour ago. Amy herself is nowhere in sight. Ron checks the bathroom, looks out into the corridor, walks through the cabin a second time. It's as if his daughter had stepped out just a minute before he appeared. He wakes his wife. Iva is at first convinced that Amy has simply gone up on deck to watch the sunrise or has slipped out to a public restroom. They search the cabin more carefully. All of Amy's personal belongings are still in place. Her purse, her wallet, her passport, her jewelry, her papers. Nothing is missing. Nothing has been taken along. It doesn't look like someone who just stepped out for a few minutes, and it looks even less like someone who made a decision to walk away for good. Brad, woken by his parents' voices, joins the search. The three of them leave the cabin and start working their way through the nearby decks, the pool, the restaurants, the open lounges. They don't call staff yet, because they're still hoping to round a corner and find their daughter and sister at some table. On one of his loops, Brad looks into the Viking Crown Lounge, which is still empty after the night shift. Amy isn't there. Meanwhile, the ship is quietly pulling into port and tying up at the dock. The gangways open, and the first passengers begin to disembark. There are no announcements over the PA, no special procedures. More than an hour after the empty balcony, Ron finally walks up to the front desk and says the words out loud for the first time. "My daughter is missing." That sentence is the moment the real investigation begins. The problem is that the most precious first hours are already gone, and a crowd of disembarked passengers is already spilling out onto the shore. In maritime practice, there's a clear set of actions for a situation like this. If a passenger is missing and may have gone overboard, the captain calls a code MOB, man overboard. The ship cuts its engines or returns to the likely point of entry, an alarm is raised, access to the gangways is restricted, and a search begins on the water and in the air. Every minute is critical. A person in the open sea only has a chance if the response is fast. That call never goes out on Rhapsody of the Seas that morning. The captain gets a report from his security team and makes a different decision. The ship follows normal docking procedures, and passengers calmly disembark through both gangways. No one is checking IDs at the exit with any real scrutiny. There are no bag checks, no extra security at the gangway. Several thousand people melt into Willemstad, mingling with the local population. The crew carries out a limited internal sweep. They check the nightclubs, the pools, the gym, the restaurants, the common corridors. Passenger cabins aren't opened. No one drags the waters around the ship. There are cameras on board, but according to the company's official response, footage from the relevant areas either wasn't preserved or never existed in the first place. The result is that in those first hours, investigators can't get their hands on a single frame showing where, or with whom, Amy Bradley left. Serious action only gets going closer to the evening. The U.S. Coast Guard and Dutch forces begin a sea search along the likely route, but they're no longer looking for a person in the water. They're looking for a body. Local police on Curaçao get inquiries on land, but they have no fresh footage, no concrete suspects. Legally, a scenario like this has its own quirks. As long as the official version is an overboard fall, the incident stays formally classified as a tragic accident and a private family misfortune. Any alternative theory automatically changes the status of the case and starts raising questions about what happened on board, about the camera footage, and about the security procedures. In those first 24 hours, nobody is asking those questions. Nobody is asking those questions because the official version is already in place. By the end of day one, the company is sticking to a single line. Their statement is that the passenger went overboard on her own. From there, the emphasis depends on who's being spoken to. With some, there's mention of a possible accident. She dozed off in the deck chair, tipped over, hit her head. With others, the conversation is steered gently toward the idea of a voluntary act. In any of these scenarios, the company's public posture stays neutral. The Bradleys don't buy that version, not from day one. They've got several inconsistencies in hand, and each one on its own can be explained, but put together they add up to a different picture. Amy is a strong swimmer. A person with her training falling into the warm Caribbean at that time of year has a real chance of staying afloat until daylight and being spotted. But no one is found at sea, not alive, not dead. The balcony of cabin 8188 gets checked later on its own. The railing there stands about 3 feet 7 inches high. For someone who's been drinking but isn't blacked out to simply tip over it by accident is next to impossible. Neither Brad nor their father describes Amy as someone on the edge of passing out. As far as they were concerned, she walked to the cabin steady on her feet and sat down on the balcony the same way. And then there are the belongings. On and around the deck chair, sandals, cigarettes, a lighter. Back in the cabin itself, an untouched purse, documents, money, and jewelry. This doesn't look like a person getting ready to jump, and it doesn't look like someone who was suddenly swept overboard in their sleep. No suicide note, no signs of depression in the days leading up, no family quarrel, and finally, there's the plain logic of a sea search. When someone falls from the deck of a modern cruise ship, the body either surfaces, gets caught in the propellers, or washes ashore within a few days. In the Amy Bradley case, there's an empty sea and an empty coastline. The overboard theory neatly closes the corporate liability, but it leaves a void where the real answer to the main question should be. Where exactly did a 23-year-old woman go between 5:30 and 6 in the morning? The first lead in answer to that question doesn't come from the sea at all. It comes from the land. About a month after the cruise, a Canadian couple is vacationing at a beach on Curaçao. Regular tourists, a short getaway, a rented bungalow. In the afternoon, they notice, on the sand, a young white woman in the company of two local men. The scene doesn't look the way couples on a beach usually look. The woman isn't smiling, isn't swimming, isn't chatting. She's standing between the two men, who are keeping close and not letting her take a single step on her own. She's in a swimsuit and shorts with barely anything else. Her face is tense. The Canadians watch for a while. Maybe it's an argument, maybe some strange kind of relationship. They try not to get involved in someone else's business, and after a few minutes they look away. But they remember her face and the general look of her skin with the tattoos. A few weeks later, back home, they happen to flip on a news piece about a missing American woman. The screen shows a photo of Amy Bradley, her family, the story of the cruise, and the Canadians freeze. On TV, the tattoos are being described: a lizard on the shoulder blade, the Tasmanian devil on the stomach, a sun on the lower back. The very same designs they had seen up close on that beach. They get in touch with U.S. authorities and give a detailed account of what they saw. Their statement makes its way to the FBI. Investigators try to track down the route, find the bungalow and the two men, but too much time has already slipped away. No names, no camera footage, nothing but the word of two tourists. And yet, this episode puts a crack in the frame of the official version. If, in April of 1998, Amy Bradley really was seen on Curaçao, then on the night of the 23rd into the 24th of March, she didn't die in the water, which means she came off the ship alive, which means her departure from the vessel was not a random event, but part of some scenario that to this day has never been pieced together. For the first time, the family seriously entertains the idea that their daughter might be alive, but held against her will. A completely different kind of search begins with that thought. That different kind of search gets an unexpected boost just a year later. In 1999, an American Navy sailor steps ashore in Willemstad and ends up at Carlos and Charlie's, a bar popular with tourists, an ordinary spot for cruise passengers and travelers passing through. Loud music, beer, souvenirs by the counter. The sailor walks in with his shipmates, orders a drink, and sits down at a table. At some point, a young woman quietly comes up to him. She doesn't do anything dramatic. She just leans in, as if to ask for a light or check on an order. Right into his ear, she says a short sentence. As he would later tell it, she's asking for help, and she gives a name. One he remembers only roughly. Something close to Amy Bradley. The sailor is thrown off. He doesn't know who Amy Bradley is. The name means nothing to him. The noise in the bar, the alcohol in his system, a mild confusion. And before he can ask her to repeat, two men walk up to the woman. They take her by the arms and guide her deeper into the room. And as far as he can tell, they quickly slip her out through a side door. He sees her for a second, maybe two. After that, she's gone. Only much later, stumbling by chance onto material about the American woman who had disappeared from the cruise ship, does the sailor recognize the face and the name, and he connects the two. He reaches out to the FBI and walks them through the episode in detail, the date of his visit, the timing of his own deployment. It all lines up with a period when Amy had been missing for nearly a year. Investigators check out his account, but again they hit a wall. Staff in popular tourist bars turn over fast. There's no camera footage in the relevant areas, and there are thousands of patrons. Nobody can establish who those two men were or where they took the girl. The sailor is left with nothing but the memory and the guilt of not jumping up, not shouting, not running after them. For the Bradley family, this episode becomes the second key after the beach. Together they point to the same geography: Curaçao, Curaçao, Curaçao again. After this, the search shifts decisively away from open water and onto the overland routes of the Caribbean, where living people disappear, not into the waves, but into private apartments. At these closed locations, paper trails are harder and harder to find. But digital trails start showing up more and more. In 2005, an anonymous letter lands at an FBI office. Inside is a printout of a photograph, which, according to the sender, is linked to a private ad on an English-language site aimed at a Caribbean audience. Based on circumstantial indicators, the region where it was posted is later said to have been Barbados. In the photo, a young woman in a room with no recognizable details, her face clearly visible. In body type, build, and facial features, she looks very much like Amy Bradley would have looked by around age 30. But the real thing isn't the face. On her body, the drawings are visible: a lizard on the shoulder blade, the Tasmanian devil on the stomach, a sun on the lower back. The placement and shape match Amy's tattoos so precisely that brushing it off as coincidence is hard. The family gets a copy of the photograph. Ron, Eva, and Brad sit down together and examine every millimeter of it. Their conclusion is clear. The resemblance is too strong to be random. The FBI is more cautious. The lab compares facial features and tattoos against existing photos taken during her life. The result yields neither a full confirmation nor a confident rejection. The quality of the image and the angle don't allow for a 100% answer. Still, the photograph becomes one of the most talked about pieces of evidence in the case. It moves from documentary films into newspapers, from newspapers into forums and online communities. Dozens of people try to track down which site the picture came from, who posted it, who was behind the ad. The trails run out, websites change domains, the registration data is fake, the payment gateways sit in different jurisdictions. If the woman in the photo really is Amy, that means 7 years after her disappearance, she's still alive and still somewhere within the Caribbean region. And in that case, her departure from the ship wasn't an accident. It was part of some closed operation. The beach in 1998, the bar in 1999, the photo in 2005. Each data point, on its own, can easily be called into question. Together, they line up into a troublingly consistent sequence, provided even one of those sightings ever gets confirmed. That consistent line doesn't exist in a vacuum. It fits into what human rights advocates and investigators have long described as the shadow infrastructure of the Caribbean Basin, a region that, at first glance was built for tourism, turns out to be just as convenient as a platform for moving people quietly. The Caribbean is dozens of islands and about 15 independent or associated jurisdictions. The borders between them are loose: speedboats, private yachts, small aircraft, short flights. Almost no one checks documents seriously. The police vary in quality, in some places well-trained, in others barely surviving on a shoestring budget. Corruption in spots is the norm rather than the exception. Against that backdrop, according to human rights organizations, the region is described as home to closed shadow networks, not for drugs, but for people. According to the material from these investigations, women are moved along non-public routes between the islands and the mainland, through private clubs, apartments, and closed venues. Their documents and their contact with the outside world end up in someone else's hands. By those same accounts, control over people in schemes like this rests on isolation and pressure. Even a brief appearance in public isn't an opportunity to escape. It's a managed situation. That's often how they explain the scenes where a woman ends up on a beach with strangers and doesn't try to reach out to anyone around her, or walks up to a man in a bar with one short sentence and vanishes immediately. For investigators, the story of Amy Bradley from 1998 onward fits this model as one of the possible explanations. None of the individual pieces of testimony, on its own, becomes evidence in court. You can't package them into a protocol. You can't attach documents. You can't bring in witnesses with an exact date and time. But taken together, they resemble a picture familiar from other cases, where missing women were later found in private ads or in the accounts of chance tourists. The system works precisely because it's invisible. To prove it, you need one living witness willing to testify in court and alive long enough to do it. In Amy's case, that witness could only have been Amy herself, and no such witness has ever been brought to the investigators. That witness is the one the family, not the investigation, has been trying to find for decades. Right after her disappearance, Ron and Iva Bradley cancel every plan they had for the year ahead. Vacations, career moves, home repairs, all of it pushed to the back burner. The search for their daughter becomes, in effect, their second job. They launch a website, amybradley.com. On it, they post photos, tattoos, descriptions of her clothes, the timeline of her last night, every theory and every piece of testimony they can gather. The site becomes a central hub where, over time, leads from around the world start flowing in. Some are obvious hoaxes or mistakes. Some are repeating patterns the parents start piecing together. A reward for credible information is first announced at $50,000. Later, it's raised to $250,000. The Bradleys don't come up with sums like that out of nowhere. The money is raised through campaigns, donations, and participation in programs. At the same time, they travel to Curacao, Aruba, and Barbados, meeting with local journalists, photographers, bar workers, and volunteers. Ron and Eva appear on major American TV shows. America's Most Wanted, Dr. Phil, 48 Hours. Every episode is both an attempt to pull out new leads and a way to keep the story from falling off the public radar for good. Brad is always there alongside them. He's not just a brother, he's also the family's main public voice when it gets too hard for their parents to speak. Legally, the Bradleys could have had Amy declared dead long ago. That would have simplified the taxes, the insurance, the paperwork. In the state of Virginia, a fixed period of absence is enough for that to happen. The parents and the brother deliberately don't take that step. As long as there's no confirmation of death, they continue to treat her as missing. In interviews, Eva has repeated the same thought for many years. She says that she feels her daughter, that she believes Amy is alive, that in her case, a mother's intuition doesn't lie. To many viewers, it sounds like a shield against the pain. For Eva herself, it's a working principle, one that makes it possible to get through another year without an answer. It's with that principle that Eva and her family live to see the next big wave of attention. In 2025, the streaming platform Netflix releases a documentary series titled Amy Bradley is Missing. 3 episodes, a total running time of around 3 hours, a serious team of producers and archival editors. The creators gain access to portions of the FBI file, record long interviews with the parents and the brother, track down passengers who had been in the Viking Crown Lounge that night, and locate former members of the Blue Orchid Band. For the first time, the balcony of cabin 8188 appears in close-up years after the events, alongside a reconstruction of the ship's route and fragments of that photograph from 2005. A viewer who had never heard the name Bradley gets, in 3 hours, as complete a picture of the case as anyone could assemble. After the premiere, the FBI once again gets a wave of calls. Some of it is useless noise, some is repetitions of old leads, but several tips get re-examined. The Amy Bradley case rises to the top of the list of missing U.S. citizens. Legally, it has never been closed, but now it gets additional funding and fresh attention from agents who weren't even on the job yet in 1998. At the same time, pressure on the cruise industry builds. Journalists start paying attention to how many people disappear from cruise ships each year and how poorly the response procedures actually work. The protocols of different companies, the requirements of different jurisdictions, and the statistics on family inquiries are all being compared. In the U.S., on the back of the series, there's a renewed discussion of an idea informally referred to as Amy's Law. What's being proposed is a tightening of the rules around passenger safety, video surveillance, and the investigation of onboard disappearances. For now, this is all talk and bills without any guarantee of passing. But the fact alone that the name of a single 23-year-old woman, a quarter of a century later, is pushing an entire industry to revisit its rules says a lot. In that sense, Netflix has turned a private family tragedy into a public lever. And that, perhaps, is the only kind of victory the Bradleys have right now. The only kind of victory doesn't mean the final one. By the time the series airs, more than 2.5 decades have passed since that night on the balcony. Amy Bradley today would be around 50, an age when her peers are raising almost grown children, building careers, moving into new houses. In her life, in place of all that, there's an empty deck chair and a pack of cigarettes on the side table. None of the reported sightings of her after 1998 has ever resulted in a definitive confirmation. Not the Canadian couple on the beach, not the sailor in the bar, not the picture on the private classified site has ever turned into a formally documented encounter with a living Amy. At the same time, No body, no remains, no documents, no digital footprint of an adult woman who could be conclusively tied to her has ever been found. The main people in the story are getting older. The parents, once in their 40s, have long since passed the age where you plan long trips. Witnesses from that night have scattered, some moving countries, some changing names. Former members of Blue Orchid have stepped away from the industry. Investigators who started the case in 1998 have long since retired, and some of them have already passed on. The story is slowly losing its eyewitnesses, and each such loss makes reconstructing it harder still. The case, meanwhile, remains open. In the FBI, it's listed as active, periodically reviewed, and updated with new theories and leads. On the Bradley family's personal calendar, the 24th of March every year is a date of its own. Not a holiday, not an official anniversary of death, not mourning in any conventional sense. Something in between, for which there isn't really a ready word in the language. It's precisely in that uncertainty that the main lesson of the story lives. Amy Bradley has stopped being just a private fate and has become a case study in how fast a living person can disappear between two moments and how long afterward a family can go on living with that empty space. The cruise liner itself was renamed long ago and now runs other routes. The balcony of cabin 8188 is still empty.